I had squatted 300 kilos in my last junior year and then went on a 5-year regression. I eventually had to humble myself and say, something has to change technically. It worked when you were 23. Eventually you're going to be 30, married, kids. You got to take advantage of the time you have. The world's not your oyster anymore.
It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. Sean, I've been looking forward to this one for a long time. Here's the reason why. It's going to be the jump off point. And I've tried to think of ways to say this and ask this without it seeming like it's a bad thing.
Uh-oh.
Okay. So, right.
This is
no, that's ready. You'll get it, but I don't know if the audience is really going to get it. You're still actively competing.
Yes.
Right. And you're at the top of your game, right? I call it your crest. You're at the crest, right? And you've been competing for what, 15 years, 12 years?
About 13 years.
13 years and coaching for 10. This is the other big thing.
Yep.
A little over 10 years. And at this crest that you're at, when I look at the open powerlifting, all lifters get to a point, this is where it gets dicey, right? Gets to a point where they really can't get that much stronger, right? And a lot of people are going to say that's bullshit. But I think you know where I'm going here.
Absolutely.
You get to a point where you really are not going to physically get that much stronger, but your ability to display your strength still hasn't been fully realized. So the way you have to approach training, peaking, and everything else has to change, because a lot of the times the numbers that we'll see in competition don't actually represent what your absolute strength is in those lifts. Rarely. I mean, think back through your 12-year career. How many times did you go 9 for 9 and they were all straight PRs and you left nothing on the platform?
Yeah, very few.
Very few.
Very few.
Right? To where this is why I'm looking forward to this conversation. That doesn't mean there can be, there are little, spikes that will come. And you might have one more left, to where, 50 pounds comes on your bench for no reason, right? But it's highly unlikely, right? That's the place where, because when you came up fast, right? You came in at like 17 and, it comes to a pretty cat. So there's beginner gains and there's genetics, right? Then you got to start trying to figure things out to be able to get more out of it. Then you hit this phase that you're in now, right? Which figuring the shit out becomes hypercritical, because the more you screw it up, the more you get screwed up.
Yep.
Right. And the more years you take off the back end, let's say you have one more peak left. Like there's one more year that for some reason your lifts are going to go up 50 pounds. If you're so screwed up that you can never even get there, there's the problem.
Yep.
Right. And then there's the other problem that you might be at this genetic ceiling or whatever we want to be able to call that. You're also compete tested, so there's a whole nother card on the table you can't play, right? Or
absolutely,
or could later, it's, who knows? It's important to note that card's not on the table to be able to play.
Exactly.
Right.
Yep.
So with that in mind, I want to go back to your origin story a little bit, just to provide more context.
Absolutely.
But that's the depth of the conversation that I want to go into, because I'm sure you'll get beginners that will hire you, or one of your coaches. But the ones that you got to really, really focus on are the ones that are in the same boat you're in. And that's where the margins matter.
Yep.
Right?
Absolutely.
It's the crazy thing, right? Because we'll all watch content that's so nuanced, and it's awesome too. Right? Because we're geeks like that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But it's horrible for the people that aren't in that demographic.
Yep.
So with your first meet, you played baseball.
Yep. That's
right?
correct. Yeah.
So was the weight training introduced as part of baseball?
Yeah, for the most part. I think, just like any 16-year-old kid, strength training becomes a part of the sport. And, growing up playing baseball, I was always kind of one of the more athletic, stronger guys. So once that got introduced to our team workouts, where it wasn't just turf work, now you're going and doing a trap bar deadlift or a front squat or whatever, and I'm pretty good at it. I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of fun. And the natural transition was, okay, I'm lifting in the off season. Okay, season's here. I want to hit a squat PR. And then you're lifting in season. And then eventually the baseball side of things, just the priorities shift. So, yep.
So that shifted while you were still playing?
Yeah. So
you went full meathead mode early.
Absolutely. And it was, I regret nothing, but at the time, I remember specifically being on baseball tournaments in Clearwater, Florida. It's like 110 degrees every summer. We're playing 3-4 games a day. And I'm sneaking out to the Gold's Gym after playing 3 games in a row to go do a leg day. And my coaches are just like, what are you doing? Like, you're being selfish. And I was being selfish. That's, wrong to do to the team. But I'm a 16-year-old kid. You feel like you can't be told anything. You want to do what you want to do. And it just became more of a priority. I still played high school baseball. I played my first year of college, and then eventually decided once powerlifting had a clear avenue, I was like, you know what? Baseball, I'm not going to play Major League Baseball, but maybe we can make this powerlifting thing work.
How did the powerlifting come into the fold?
Interesting. So I had a buddy. He was actually the younger brother of one of my best friends on my baseball team. And he played baseball. He was pretty good, but he was more of a football kid. And he actually lifted with Shauna Mendelson out in Bohemia in New York. So he had like the full sort of like West Side principle way of powerlifting training for the sake of his football career. And because he played baseball, he would sometimes join us on our workouts, and he's like, hey, you should sign up for a powerlifting meet, just see how it goes. And I was like, okay, whatever. Like, I like lifting heavy, but this is not something I would do for anything more than for fun. And I did my first meet. Actually, Dave Hoff was our head ref at our first meet. It was an unsanctioned IPA meet. There were like 13 of us. And after that first meet, I was hooked. It's like I got the taste of it. I was like, okay, this was unsanctioned. Where do I find the bigger meets? And that was my senior year of high school. And I could kind of see the writing on the wall that once I got to college, unless the baseball experience just blew me away, we were probably going to continue down this powerlifting path.
I was going to go to your open powerlifting, but I'll just ask, because that first meet I don't believe was in there. How did you end up going USAPL? Right? Because you weren't training with those people, right? So it was the suggestion to be able to do the meet.
Yep.
Right? Where if you were training in a group of those people, your direction may have been completely different.
Yeah.
Where it when you were looking up the next meet that it found its way into the USAPL?
It was actually YouTube, because like you said, at that point in time, there was no USAPL really anywhere, right? Everything was, you had some USPA on the East Coast, a lot of it on the West Coast. There was a lot of RPS on the East Coast at the time.
I'm not going back. Yeah, I'm not going back far enough.
Yeah. I'm getting up.
Yeah.
So at the time,
was it ADFPA? What was the drug tested?
Well, so the USAPL was around. It's just that the number of meets were so infrequent, especially on the East Coast at the time. There was some up in Massachusetts, which is where I ended up actually moving during college. But when I was growing up in New York, you had like the RPS heat wave in July, and that was really the only meet going on. But that was like the fitness YouTube boom when I was going. That was 2014, 2015. And I'm just digesting as much informative content as I could. And I came across Johnny Candido, who is one of the, I guess, foremost OG fitness YouTuber, powerlifting YouTuber guys. He's now become one of my best friends. He was a groomsman in my wedding. So crazy how life goes. But at the time, it wasn't very clear what the competitive path looked like in powerlifting, because everything was so, you show up to this meet if you want to. There was no pipeline. And Johnny Candido's YouTube channel at the time, he was already competing in the USAPL. So he was originally from Ohio. I guess there was USAPL here at the time. And he was doing nationals and then went to Junior Worlds, and seeing that there was this carved out path toward some international level of competition, I was like, well, I got to find a USAPL meet. Like, where do we go? Where do we have to fly to do one of these meets? And it ended up just working out conveniently that when I moved to Massachusetts for college, that at the time, the biggest by membership community of the USAPL was in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. So that's how that all came to be.
Well, you went to MIT, right? And this is going to be so meathead if you say the reason that you went there is because the gym and the powerlifting was there.
No.
Okay. Well,
no.
I selected my universities based upon training environments.
Yeah.
Right? And I know a lot of other people that have.
Yeah.
But it's not MIT. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, exactly. Yeah.
So why did you decide to go to MIT first?
So, I mean, when you're young, you don't.
Get in?
So, growing up, I have to give a ton of credit to my parents. They really emphasized education. My dad specifically, actually also went to MIT, and I grew up going to this like very small private school on Long Island that basically had the purpose of, hey, we want to get you 2-3 years advanced in every subject so that by the time you get to high school, you can take all the classes that seniors are taking in your sophomore year. So huge gratitude to my parents and to the teachers at that school that when I got to high school, I could just load up my resume and just had this transcript that kind of stood out, amongst others. And in high school, like all the high level stuff, it's always math and science. So when you're that age, you're just like, well, I guess this is what smart kids do. You do math and science. So MIT seems like the place to be. And funny enough, they actually had a decent baseball program. So I had applied and done showcases to some of the Ivy League schools, some of the D1 schools, and it just became clear that MIT was the best academic option. And I wasn't going to roll the dice on baseball, especially if I knew, hey, you're not going to be a professional baseball player. Don't let your education be dictated by where you want to play baseball for 4 years. So, yeah.
So when you went in, what were you thinking that you were going to pursue after?
So I didn't know career-wise at all. I just knew subjects. I was like, well, I like chemistry. I like math. Maybe I'll major in one of those two. And then I get there and I'm talking to people who are majoring in all these things. And they're basically like, unless you want to be in lab all the time, you're probably better suited for something else. So now I'm looking out into the whole engineering world and I'm like, well, I've never done engineering. I don't really even know what this all entails, but it seems like the broadest major is mechanical engineering. So I'll just do that. And yeah, it was.
So how does this coincide then with you finding where you're training? Right. And then balance is kind of a crappy word.
Yeah.
Trying to figure out how far was the gym from school?
So what was really nice is that MIT's rec center actually had some pretty decent equipment. So they had, at the time, Ohio power bars, they had squat racks, deadlift platforms, no fancy benches, no fancy bars or anything, but in terms of machines, and then just in terms of a bar you could actually squat with and not have fall off your back, we could make do. At the time, there's a gym, TPS, I can't remember which location they were at first. There was an Everett one and a Malden one. But on weekends, the people I knew in the area that powerlifted, they were like, oh, come to TPS and we'll train here. So you get to see a place like this with all the bands and chains and you're like, ooh, this is really nice. But I actually built most of my powerlifting career in that rec center. And what was crazy is when I got there, I was not the first powerlifter. There's probably a group of 10 powerlifters who trained at the rec center. They were either students, PhD students, maybe even just people who lived in the area and bought a guest pass. And two of them had done, I think one of them had done Raw Unity at the time. So it was like guys who were 10 years older than me had already been doing this for a bit. And luckily I got immersed into like this team environment of lifting that I think was just probably one of the most invaluable parts of my early training career.
Now, was the collegiate nationals on your radar?
So at the time, collegiate, I think the year after I graduated was the first year that they had, maybe it was the year I graduated or the year after, it was the first year they had a raw division. for collegiate nationals because everything was single
Mm-hmm.
ply up to that point. And I had never dabbled in single ply, multiply. So I hadn't had any interest in it. And then we didn't have a team. Like we didn't have enough people to send a team because it was myself and one other person who were actually undergraduate who would have been eligible. And then everyone else was late 20s, early 30s. So
How are you plotting the path? Because the path is to qualify for nationals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So were you focused more on the education and just putting the meets in where it was convenient for that, or picking the meets based upon the best path to be able to get to nationals?
Yeah. I'll put it this way. When I was in high school playing baseball, every baseball season, my GPA would drop a couple points. So the athletic side of things, the competitive side of things, always had the visceral excitement I had for that was always higher than education. But I was never going to let school, be in danger, right? So I probably could have done better in school than I did, but I was able to keep up with what I wanted to do. So whenever there was a big meet, whether I was coming here to the Arnold or Nationals, I would make sure that I looked at what the schedule was going to be like. I'd email my professors months in advance. Hey, I'm not going to be here for this. Can I take a makeup exam? Sometimes they were gracious. Sometimes they're like, you'll be fine. So in those moments, I'm like, all right, I really have to study, a week, 2 weeks in advance just to make sure that when I'm flying back at 5 a.m. from Columbus and then I have an exam at 8 or 9 that I'm not, getting screwed. So
I'm just speaking about just the week in general. Like,
oh yeah. Okay.
How the week lays out.
Gotcha. I didn't sleep. I mean, like you said, balance before, you can only pick a couple things that you can hold in, in a decent standing. And for me, it was my lifting, my eating, and my school. So social life, non-existent, sleep, non-existent. So my day would start with classes. I'd go to class, I'd get something to eat, I would train, and then every night I was probably starting homework at 9 or 10 p.m. and maybe finishing up around 4 a.m.
Did you have training partners?
Yeah. Yeah, we had a good group. It was a lot of fun.
How did you manage the class schedule? Because when you go to pick the classes, the classes are where they're at.
Yeah,
right.
Of course.
If you have this set training time at 2:30, it's always going to happen.
Yep.
The class that you have to take is going to be at 2:30.
Yep.
So then you got to have the guys change the training time, or you're just shit out of luck.
Yeah.
So how did that work out?
Well, the good thing is that most people also had class or work. So we usually trained, I don't know,
late
5, 6 o'clock. I mean, some days you get some guys who just, hey, I was stuck in lab. I showed up at 7:30 and you just miss them. But yeah, most of us were evening lifters. Occasionally you'd get someone who had a free, they were taking a light load of classes that semester and they had a gap early in the day they wanted to take advantage of. But yeah, for the most part, we were lifting 5 to 7 usually as a starting point.
Yeah, that would be the smart thing, I guess, if I'm going to give some advice out here, because there's a couple pieces of advice I can probably throw out there to aspiring lifters. Don't be a bouncer, for one thing, right? Because for me, the most optimal time to train was always like 10:30, 10:45. And
that's AM.
Yeah. Right. Well, if you're bouncing, you're not getting back home till like 3. So then you get to sleep, you wake up, you eat, so for me, it was by far the highest priority.
Yeah.
Education was like 10th. There was nothing in between, right? It's not, so that's the other thing is I wouldn't change anything, but comparing the two paths, it would have been way more efficient had I set up a training group at like 5:30.
Yeah.
Because then it would have been the same group too for a longer, well, unless they flunked out,
Yeah.
It would have been the same group for a longer period of time instead of having to try to scramble to pull the new groups together every meet, it seemed like. Because, did you have that even with you'll have a good solid group for one meet, then the meet's over, a couple stay, then the other ones are like,
No, I mean, everyone was there for, their degree or their lab work. So even when we would sign up for meets and you get a little bit more out of someone, right? They're doing a meet maybe for the first time in a year. They were all training for the love of the game. Like that was one thing that was I think honestly hard to come by these days is that everyone I lifted with just loved powerlifting. So meet's over, didn't matter. They're still there 2 days, 3 days after the comp, and they're just back at it. So it was really reliable that you'd be training with roughly the same group pretty much every day.
So how are you and your group going about learning more effective training?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because you're now past the beginner gains, right?
Yeah.
So now you're in this second phase. I always pause because like early childhood development's a whole different phase too.
Mm-hmm.
But from the second meathead phase,
yeah.
Like, so you have the beginner gains. Now things matter, not as much as what we're going to get into in the next phase.
Yeah.
But it matters, right? Of
course.
But you're also young enough that you can get away with a lot, right? You can get away with not sleeping and all this other stuff. But, and the group was what, like 6 to 10?
Yeah. On any given day, you could have as many as 10 of us in there. And then sometimes it might just be like 4. But the way that the gym was set up is that there were 2 squat racks next to each other and then 2 facing that. So if there were 8 to 10 of us and we're all squatting on the same day, we're all kind of looking at each other and just rotating who goes when. So we're not making eye contact on the way down squatting. But
we live in some crazy times right now where there's not a day that I don't go on the internet and I see some BS crap about this research study or this research study. This isn't new. I've been in this industry for 4 decades. One thing that's helped me is 8 years ago, the mass research review started and became a godsend. The mass research team are professional researchers that are also meathead. So they've done this great job of being able to take all these topics and put them into this research review that I get every month. I'm excited to partner with them. I spoke with Eric Helms about this on the podcast. It's simple, it's easy. They're offering a 20% discount to all podcast listeners. The code is elitefts20. When you join, you get the research review, which is going to be sent to you every single month. That has 7 to 9 articles in there. The archive, which is 1,500 articles, thousands of videos. Just head over to massresearchreview.com and use the code elitefts20. The link will be in the description.
Yeah, it was no, it was good.
I forgot about that one.
Yeah.
That's good. But how are you, because I'm assuming they're not stupid. They're an MIT, right? So you're going to have 4 to 10 people all going online trying to learn what the most effective way to train is, right? And then there's going to have to be some kind of consensus. There can still be deviations in programs, but still a consensus on maybe frequency, right? So how did you guys go? Where were you looking, and then how did you go about that?
So it was interesting because I was the only one who had previously had a coach, and I was the only one who hired a coach early on in that process. So eventually it got to the point where I was coaching almost all of them, probably at the end of 2015, early 2016. But prior to even getting to college, I had our baseball strength and conditioning coach write powerlifting programming for me. And he had a background in powerlifting, had learned a lot of the West Side and conjugate principles. So that was the world I came from. But then I was the first guy, because I took it seriously as a sport, not just as a passion. I hired a coach my first semester in college. So a lot of what was making its way into conversation amongst us was stuff that I was learning from my coach at the time, along with, watching YouTube stuff. And then one of the guys who trained with us, Frank Wu, he was this, I think he was a Harvard grad and worked in the area, but still trained at the gym because it was the best gym in the area, basically, if you wanted to be near Cambridge. And he was the one who had done Raw Unity. He kind of had like that, sage wisdom, right? So it was kind of this combination of like him having sort of that old guard, wise words of advice, those little things that you couldn't possibly know without just the miles on you, right? And then I was bringing in a lot of just like, here's the new information, here's the programming stuff. And, we kind of all adopted that, I guess you could say.
So in those years, what would the basic template of that programming look like? What could I compare it to?
So I think when I had first started working with a coach that freshman year of college, it was very similar to like the sort of DUP training style that came out of the, like Mike Zordos, Eric Helms, Ben Escrow era of powerlifting, where they were taking a lot of the like dose response concept from bodybuilding and applying it to powerlifting, right? So rather than it being just, we do a heavy day here and we always do a 1 rep max on this day or some variation, they were like, no, well, everyone has a different tolerance to certain total volumes, and we can treat these competition lifts like competition specific bodybuilding. So the first coach I worked with for 5 years. And I think if I had to describe the template to you, it was like you're squatting 2 to 3 times a week, you're benching 3 to 4 times a week, deadlifting twice a week, and most of it's RPE based. The rep ranges can get maybe a bit higher, right? So some days you're squatting 8s, some days you're squatting 5s. So it was undulating maybe across the week in terms of what quality you were training, and then just a block periodized, format across blocks.
Well, you can look back and kind of analyze what it really, so how were those blocks laid out? Were they like 5s and 3s, or, was it strength and peak, or was it just, because the undulating, it's like kanji, like there's a million ways we can describe both of these, and they're all going to be wrong.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So were the blocks laid out in, I want to say a logical manner, but if it works, it works.
Yeah. No, I think it was very straightforward block periodization following that process of, we're going to be working in, some higher rep ranges, building muscle and building strength, maybe 1 squat days 8s, 1 days 5s. And then the next block, it might be 6s and 4s. And the next block might be 5s and 3s. And then that would sort of take you into the competition. And that was also kind of the time period where, just having a top single on each lift once a week was kind of becoming the norm, like that sub-maximal sort of practice single that you just do before you start your rep work.
Which kind of blows up the theory of having the block in the first place, right? And like, was this single controlled?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So it's like the emotional state's controlled. You're only doing the single to try to get an idea of where, I call it a perceived max.
Yeah.
So it's not really a max. You're just trying to see if your max is where it should be.
Yeah.
Was that what it was?
Yeah. I think the best way to word it, it's just that it's a proxy, right? It's just the indicator set that says, hey, we're on track today, and across a block, like, we're actually making progress.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's an anchor.
Exactly.
Right? And you guys actually just did that as an anchor?
For the most part. I think when you're 18 years old and you feel great on one day, you might be sending a, sorry, coach, I hit a PR text, but the intent obviously was, further away from comp and these higher rep blocks, those singles get held back. And then as we get closer, that RPE starts to become more of the, ramping it up becomes more of the focus for that single than the rep work. So
would you guys say that you stuck to it more times than not?
I think honestly, on average, I think I was a pretty adherent client early on. Because coming from a baseball background, baseball coaches are psychos, and you don't want to mess up, right? You want to be, you want to make sure you're reading your signs properly. You want to make sure you're not striking out looking. Like, there's so many opportunities for your coach to chew you out. So I think coming from that background, it put me in the headspace of like, all right, I want to make sure for the most part, like, I'm checking my boxes. I'm, crossing my T's, dotting my I's. So I think for the most part, I was responsible. I can't speak for some of the other guys that I was training with.
Well, I ask because there was a time period where I was writing programming for people that were training out here because I wasn't going to be there, at the same time. And I played around with this concept of a perceived max, right? If I knew I wanted them to do 3 sets of 3 at 90%, right? I didn't want to anchor that 90% on something that was based upon a meet, months ago, using anabolics and all the other kind of shit that plays into that. I wanted to base it upon what could really be there for that day.
Yeah.
So the instructions were to warm up, and typically anybody that's been doing this for a while, around 60%, maybe 70%, you have a pretty good idea within 5 to 10 kilos,
Yep.
20 pounds, where you would be if you maxed,
Yep.
right? And it did not work. It did not work. It was, they were missing. I would like come in late and I'm seeing them miss things.
Yeah.
I'm like, how are you missing weight?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they worked up and maxed out until they missed. And then they're so fatigued that when it gets time to actually do the 85 or 88 or whatever percent I had, they're in a fatigue state. So it's not even that. Then they based it upon the lift they missed because they might have got it. And I had all kinds of,
It was a misgroup, coach.
oh man, I had guardrails in there. Like, you have to agree with the training partner that this is within 20 pounds of what your max would be. So nobody should have to touch this, you know? And I was trying to base off the Bulgarians because they'd work up to a single and then do work sets off that single and then work up again. I'm like, well, what if you just didn't work up? What if you just did this and based it upon what you thought you could do for that day with agreement from your training partners that see you all the time? Solid concept. It didn't work, man.
Yeah.
It didn't work, but it's interesting to see how it played its way out through the programming back then. And because the ones that were able to do it effectively, I think it does give a really good guide because during that phase, the strength isn't as linear as people think. You know, it's like you train, you get 5-10 pounds stronger on a lift, and then this next phase, like 40 pounds.
Yeah.
And it's probably technical. You know, there's other factors that probably play into it. But if your program is so structured that you can't take advantage of that new technical proficiency or just learning how to use compensatory acceleration, then you can go 6 months and not really waste time, but not utilize it to the greatest effect.
Yeah, no, for sure.
So with that in mind, when did you start changing parameters more based upon what you were seeing and what you were feeling?
I think the first example would be, so the coach that I hired, he's become a fixture in the sport, Joey Flex. He's become probably the most decorated coach on the tested side of the sport, more national champions, world champions than anybody. At the time that I hired him, I was his first athlete, his first online athlete. I don't know specifically what about his promotional post he put on Instagram that made me hire him, but prior to that, I think he was just a personal training and then training people in strength training in person. So he had other lifters after having worked with me in that initial phase, but because we were both new enough and I was crazy enough to just do whatever, a lot of experimenting went into my programming. And the first instance of that was I started benching every day and working up to a heavy single, essentially, not a max, but a heavy single every day. And this was
every day, like every day?
Yeah, every day.
So not every training day, like every day.
Every day. Yes.
5 days a week or 7?
I think it was 6 days a week originally.
Close enough. To
yeah, exactly. Split the difference. And this was around maybe January 2015, where my bench max at that point in time was 303, I think. By nationals in October, I had benched 353. So 50 pounds on my bench across a.
And this was that everyday time period.
Yes, this was the everyday time period. Obviously, in conjunction with that, there were technical changes. Sure. I learned a little bit more how to arch. I brought my grip out. So I think I was making technical changes that made me more resilient to the amount of workload I was doing. But there was a lot that we learned through these more aggressive periods of training. And basically what that served as, I think for Joey as a coach, was like, okay, what are my upper and lower bounds for what someone could feasibly do? Because the following year, prepping for the Arnold in 2016, we had started pushing the frequency harder on everything. And that didn't go well. It didn't go poorly, but it didn't work any better than the slightly lower. So after that prep, we were like, okay, we could bring it back. But I mean, funny enough, we're 10 years removed from that point, and I have not benched fewer than 5 days in the past 10 years. So
I got a question for you. When you were talking about the programming and hitting all these heavy singles, and also about the blocks, um, how, like, if you have the itch to go for a PR and it's been like a few months, should you stick with the program, your blocks, or if you kind of have that itch, should you try to scratch it? Kind of is because you guys were talking about perceived 1 rep max. So I was just kind of wondering, like, how that all works, basically.
I mean, as a coach, my should answer is you should stick with the program. But I also understand that, like, the psychology of lifting is just as important as the physical. And sometimes lifters, you get someone who's doing poorly in school or their girlfriend broke up with them. They're like, I need a win. I need this win. And, somebody hits that PR and that reignites their headspace toward training, right? And then maybe that's the catalyst for the next year of really productive training. I think of like the stories of Dennis Rodman, right? Going to Vegas in the middle of NBA playoffs, and any coach would, you'd lose your job, right? But he's like, no, like let him do his thing. He'll be back. And, obviously it doesn't work for everybody, but, it wasn't something where, oh, coach, I feel good, so I should be, just taking advantage of that. I think the best way to really think about those singles in that more year-round way is it's like we're just keeping our fitness higher so that, when we have the opportunity to return to heavier stuff, it's not this maybe longer adjustment period than it needs to be. So
I'm trying to stay with your own story here, but I keep wanting to go to your actual programming methodology now, because I want to show how it's evolved, right, over the period of time. I'm really fighting to pull back from that. So during this time period, that's one example, of one of the things that you guys are playing around with. And in your own head, you're kind of like banking this information.
Yeah.
Frequency, can be a bigger variable than what others may think it to be.
Yeah.
Right. What are some of the other things as you were working with him and with others and during this growth phase, right, that you were playing around with? Because you have the luxury of, you don't know it, but you have the luxury of being younger and being able to get away with, some stupid shit, at that time.
Yeah. I think technique was easily the biggest one because, you think about what powerlifting was prior to that generation, and it was all massive guys, right? It's all guys who are, you have some lightweights, but for the most part, every guy is like, I'm going to get as big as possible. A lot of the sport was untested. So people are shaped the same way, and you're shaped the same way, you probably move the same way. But it's around that 2014 time point where this becomes more of a commodity, right? Like hiring a coach becomes something that people just do because the coaches who are able to provide online powerlifting coaching are really the only custodians of knowledge that we have, right? Like we don't have, back then we don't have a fraction of the educational resources we have now. So if you wanted to learn how to powerlift, that's really the only place you could go to. And maybe you don't live near a gym where that's an option. So that demographic of tested powerlifting is body size and type wise is so different. So one of the things that I'm realizing, just because I move pretty well and I can put myself in all these different positions, is like, maybe there's a better way to set up on bench press. Maybe there's a better way to learn how to sumo deadlift than what people have done in the past. And I'll never forget, it's hilarious because the irony of it, I remember being on Instagram maybe around 2015 and seeing, so there's a guy, JP Couchy. He was a big fixture in tested powerlifting in Australia. He was their champion 66 kilo male lifter. And he was one of the coaches for the team. So whenever they went to Worlds, he would help coach. And his sister at the time competed, and she had a massive arch, super short range of motion. And I remember just commenting on the post being like, this isn't a real bench. This looks like garbage. Like, what is this? It's, you see those comments till this day.
Well, not anymore. They changed the rule.
I guess that's fair.
Yeah.
I guess that's true.
Anyhow.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
Exactly. A lot to talk about.
Yeah.
Not too long later, I see a lifter, Owen Hubbard, who's an 83 kilo lifter, so my weight class, competing at the World Championship for Great Britain. And he has the same setup, and he's benching at the time, I think, maybe 205 kilos at 83, which still today is a very elite bench press in that weight class. So now I have someone I'm going to be hopefully competing against doing this technique and seeing benefit from it. So I'm like, I need to learn how to do that. And, you know, I think just through a lot of practice, I mean, I hate to say that I have maybe a unique eye for it and feel for it, but I think I developed a lot of understanding of all these little technical nuances just from my own lifting, that then when I would watch lifters I was coaching at the time or training with, I'd be like, oh, okay, try that and see how that goes. And eventually, right, the shape that lifters now take on, if you go and watch an average powerlifting meet on a bench press, on a deadlift, it looks very different than what it did 10 years ago.
Yeah. I want to take a second to throw a quick shout out to my friends over at Mastonomics. They have some of the greatest t-shirts. Their memes are incredible. Their YouTube gym tours are great. These drink spotter things, I got about 7 of them out here. Snap them on power racks, put smelling salts in it, drinks. I think they hold up to 10 pounds, or they have different sizes of these. These are great. They made coasters out of stall mats, which is amazing. But what I really wanted to let you know is to go check out gymradar.com. They launched a website that's going to help people find home gyms that they can train at, and to be able to put your own home gym on there and not only be able to find where it is, but see what they actually have. And it's also great for product reviews because people are putting the products that they have in this Gym Radar. Just go check it out. It's great. So it's www.gymradar.com. And also check out Mastonomics. Check out their website, check out their Instagram. The memes are great. And check out their YouTube. Interesting, because it's on how you come into the sport is generally the path that you stay, right? So I want to put that out there, because had you stayed and gone in the gyms that were in the area that you kind of were first influenced, you would have more than likely been on a whole different side of the sport, right?
For sure.
This is where, I don't pay that much attention anymore. So it doesn't seem like the Inter-Powerlifting Federation drama is as bad as what it used to be, from tested to untested, but I could be completely wrong because I don't follow it anymore. But I think that's just to put this disclaimer out there, that's what a lot of people just seem to forget. Like, why in the fuck are you in the USAPL? It's like, dude, that's all they know. Like, why in the fuck are you in, the APF?
Yeah.
Well, that's all you knew, right? So it's the path that you start is the path you stay loyal to. And I thought loyalty was a good thing. But anyhow, my rant's over. But and to correct something that you said as well is the tested side was, I believe, and I think I can prove it, was always way bigger than the untested, right? Because if you look at the federation memberships, if we go back to when I was competing, it might have been 20,000 total.
Okay.
Right. And then out of that, if you took the APF, the IPA, and there might have been one other, non-tested federation, that would be like 20%. The other 80% were ADFPA or what USPF, Now you can debate if they were really tested or not tested, but if the meat says it's tested, that's how I'm going to say it's tested. Yeah. And so but I think that powerlifting throughout all of time gets this bad rap. It's a little bit better now because everybody assumes that you have to be on drugs to do it. And I will come out and say the majority of the people who compete in the sport are not. Yeah. Right. And I'll probably get it on this one as well. And people are going to say, that's bullshit. Like, no, you're just fucking weak. Right. Well, actually, they're comparing themselves to the wrong people. Yeah. They'll compare themselves to people that they see on social media instead of going to open powerlifting, looking at what weight class they could be in, and then scrolling down and seeing that they're not last. Yep. You're like, it would suck to be last. Somebody's got to be last. But and when you scroll down at the very bottom, almost everybody that we would know or run into in a gym is probably going to be stronger than what the very bottom of that is. Right. So they're not. So does that mean, this is where I go back to the whole drug thing. So does that mean everybody that's in the bottom 50% is taking drugs? Because if they are, their shit's fake as hell. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So with that in mind, as we're kind of navigating through this space, I forgot what the topic was before I even went on this stupid rant. The tested, the non-drug tested, what were you saying before I went on this rant? With the frequency?
The technique.
The technique.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. The technique on the gear side, not the anabolics, but when it was all single ply, because I will say that, I mean, the sport was all single ply since I got in it in 83.
Yeah.
Right. And then the multiply came later, like 90 something. I didn't even know until I came to Westside that there was such a thing as a 2-ply brief or a 2-ply suit. They didn't advertise it. You had to call and ask for it.
Yeah.
Like, what kind of bullshit is this? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Like, we'll see if we have it in the back.
Yeah. Like only certain people know about this. And it's a weird type of thing. But when the gear started to get more radical, technique became huge because that was how you were able to figure out how to use it, you know, to its advantage. So if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, that didn't really happen on the non-drug tested side.
Well, I think, you know, because I mean, you are right, and I agree with you about the membership.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember coming up in the sport, like when you were going online to watch a meet, like you're watching the backyard meet of the century, or you're watching Pete Rubish lifting in front of his washing machines, like the pinnacle of the sport in terms of its grandeur and its hype was all on the untested side.
Yeah.
So I think in spite of maybe the tested side having more numbers, every little nugget of information we were trying to filter down from the untested side.
Which is weird.
Yeah. So all of the technical stuff you would hear in the gym came from the era of single ply and multiply untested lifting.
Yeah.
And I think when people realize like, oh, I'm 145 pounds, like I can't do that, or that doesn't feel like a good position, that combined with the fact that there are now people you're paying to get you results, it's like, all right, we got to find another way. Like we have to figure out, how do we lift optimally as a 114 pound woman lifting raw, or as a 205 pound male lifting raw. And I think that is what ushered in maybe a new era of technique that now looks so different than what it used to.
With the tested side having single ply and raw, and it still has single ply, right?
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
still kind of like hanging on. Were the technical cues from the single ply, because it would have all been single ply before the raw came, were those technical cues filtering into the raw that were from that single ply?
I think to a degree, but I feel like the single ply community of tested powerlifting was like, not to throw shade, but like very elitist, right? Like they're like the prim and proper ones of the sport, so to speak. So I feel like the types of people and the circles you maybe could run in that were more approachable and just easily accessible were the guys who were, you know, training with bands and chains and doing all of that sort of stuff. So I think in terms of what information was readily available to the average person getting into powerlifting, it was from that era of powerlifting and not like the USAPL single ply domain.
So when you came in, because it's the frequencies that you're speaking about on the, see, I don't know what the single ply side of the tested. So I don't know. So I don't want to speak out of turn. So on the non-tested single ply or multi-ply, the frequency couldn't be, 3, 4, 5 days per week, right? And I don't know if it ever could be. I guess, well, I'll back that. It could be, but nobody's going to go through the accumulation to build the work capacity to be able to do it. Right. But it wasn't the thing where on that raw side, this came in kind of with the Shiko. I mean, if we go back to like Eric Talman, who he was working with, the Shiko protocols, was when you were coming up, was that the majority was all higher frequency of the programming that you would see?
I think it was pretty split, honestly, because prior to hiring a coach, I ran all of those template programs, and me just being the type of person who wanted to go full bore with things, I gravitated toward the Shiko and the Small Love and all of those higher frequency, higher volume programs. But if you walked into a gym, I'd say it'd be a pretty even split between someone who's just running, 5-3-1 or 5x5. They're doing each lift 1 day a week. And then there's some crazy guy who's squatting, benching, and then going back to squatting. I wouldn't say there was a pattern.
Wow. So the hybrids can be dicey, right? So if you have that squatting 5 days a week, or just say 4 or more, and then you're trying to throw wraps and you're trying to throw a bunch of accessories in there, it's just a blazing fire. That's not a good thing. And that seemed to be what it seemed to happen a lot, right? Which would create unnecessary criticism for the higher frequency, right? And stronger support the bias for the lower frequency. It was weird. Like I think it's over the last, before the pandemic, like since 2018, it seems like it's all training. Like everybody that knows training kind of sees it globally for what it all is, instead of these little pocket segments.
Yeah, like everything's been categorized under a system now where we understand, okay, I see the pros and cons of this. This is where you would apply it, rather than like you're the weird guy off in the corner doing whatever.
There's not the cults that are associated. There's still, a little bit, but they're super minority, and they can't even justify the positions that they're in, which is an odd thing. But because I think it went through all these different things, where people were combining, well, if I do the 5-3-1, but then I do Chico for the squats, and all this Frankenstein stuff, which never created a real Frankenstein. It just created a lot of drop off from that. But there is a filtration process with all programming, how it kind of lays out to where you end up, if you've been around as long as you end up with this basic template, right, that you're going to operate from. And that base, for all these different variables, frequency, load, intensity, all these different things can move out of that base, right? So if you were to explain to me what that base is for you now, right? Because it's going to change. I get it. It's going to change for individuals. It's going to change for whatever you're doing at this current time, but there still is a base structure that's there at the basic level. How would you describe the basic level?
All right. Let me see if I can unify this all together. I am going to go, I love telling stories, so I'll go back and tell a story real quick. But I think about the programs that were written back when I was in college. You get either it's a template or you get a program from a coach, and it's written as, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. You follow it whatever days you can, as long as you do it all in order and get it done in a week, you're good to go. And there was a guy I was coaching at the gym with me, late intermediate. Like, he's a pretty strong guy, squats around 600 pounds, deadlifts 740 pounds at a body weight of like 220. Like, decently strong guy, not elite by any means, but he's been at this for a bit. Making progress is not just throw your squat shoes on the platform. And one of the things I noticed was that, we had his squat set up so that he was doing his like mid to higher rep work stuff on a Monday. And then on his Friday session, he would hit his primary squat. And just every week it was like, Monday feels better. Monday feels better every week. And Friday, I feel like I've forgotten how to squat. And then I'm sitting there thinking, and I'm like, okay, I know of a similar experience that my coach had with his fiance in coaching her, where if she was competing in the morning, she would bench the day before. But if she was competing in the evening, she would bench the morning of. Because there's this idea that the time between exposures actually makes a difference. And it's not just as simple as I do this day, I do this day, I do this day. So I was like, let's move your primary squat up from Friday to Thursday. And in a week, he's back to just hitting crazy PRs. So fundamentally, from a programming standpoint, nothing really changed, right? It's not like we added or lowered volume. We didn't change rep ranges, exercise selections. It was a matter of exposure timing. Then I had my own personal experience with my deadlift, where we'd have these awesome off seasons. And like I told you, I always had singles in the program. I have this awesome off season where, I'm doing these sets of 8 on sumo deadlift, my sets of 5 on sumo deadlift, and I still have my single on one of those days. And as we would get to prep, the rep ranges would come down. And, the rep ranges would come down, the singles would go okay. And then we'd get toward the end of prep and we'd be like, things just don't feel as good as I don't feel like I have that same, the bar's just not floating off the ground the way that we would expect. It's like, okay, you're probably fatigued. The taper will take care of it. And then it wouldn't. And then we do another meet and we would say, okay, well, maybe you were still a little bit too fatigued. We'll pull back a bit more. Same thing would happen. every best single I would have would come amidst those higher rep sumo deadlift periods. And I and some other coaches at the time started asking ourselves, like, what if the textbook definitions of periodization and what we know to yield top end strength are not as formulaic as we've been taught to believe? Like, what if there are actually lifters where their E1RM in real time will increase even if the training is less specific or the rep ranges are slightly higher, or maybe the exertion that we're going to is lower, right? So this started to form a lot of the training structure where we're layering these concepts on top of the general principles, and we're trying to now kind of group lifters into buckets and be able to say, okay, well, you're built like this and you're having this problem. And another lifter I have who we fix that problem with does this. What's the thing that that lifter is doing that worked for them that maybe now could work for you? And sometimes it's the very straightforward thought of, hey, you're not built for squat. You know, maybe you can't handle 2 days of low bar. You have to do one day that's a belt squat or one day that's high bar. But then the complete opposite case could be true for another lifter. So we're sort of, and again, because we're not owners of a gym working as a team, it's like we're charging a monthly rate. And if you can't yield the results, they're just going to go find someone who can. So we're just trying to turn dials up and down and figure out how do we categorize lifters, and then what are the principles that guide them. So I tell that whole story to say that basically the way programming looks nowadays under my system, under a lot of the coaches on the tested raw side of powerlifting, is that based on that lifter's historical training and based on whatever heuristics or examples you have from lifters you've worked with in your population, there's a frequency of each lift that you know is probably going to be sustainable for that lifter, right? And then you ask yourself, okay, along the spectrum, because you could have two people squatting 3 days a week, and one person is throttling what 3 days looks like. Every day is hard. And then you have another guy where one day is hard and the other two are just, one day is getting their legs stronger. They're, doing more light quad focus work. And then the other day is just practice. So then the question is like, where on the spectrum do they lie in terms of how much we're really maxing out what is capable across that frequency? Then we zoom in another layer. Well, based on their feedback about their fatigue patterns and pains they've dealt with and periods of training that went just uncharacteristically well compared to others, what actually is hard training for that individual and what's easy? Because you get some guys who you put them through like a volume phase and it was worth nothing, right? They get on the other side of that and it paid zero dividends. And then there are other guys that their legs just can't stop growing, right? You give them high rep squats and it's like steroids for them. So now we've zoomed in that other layer. We're looking at the days and asking ourselves, well, what qualities do I need to train across all of these days? They could be different qualities, but all within this cohesive plan. And then from there, how am I ordering the days, right? How am I going to set myself up so that proxy day or that anchor is reliable as a test, right? Because if I am too fatigued coming into the day that has that like indicator single or whatever top set, because of fatigue, now I won't know if that's actually an indicator that we're getting better, right? I want to remove that confounding variable. So you might have some guys where very expectedly, hey, I gave you some harder high rep squatting and you're smoked. That's probably most people. But then you get some guys who do that, and then 2 days later, they're like, my legs felt unbelievable to squat. And there are those little things you learn that then dictate, okay, maybe I have a ramping structure to my 3-day-a-week squat layout where it starts light, and then the middle session's a little heavier, and then the third is the heaviest. But maybe this other guy fits the mold where doing it in an undulating fashion makes more sense, where the top of the week is hard, the middle of the week is practice, that third day is the heavy day. So I know that's a super long-winded answer. I apologize for the ramble, but I think the best way to describe it is we're trying to assess what qualities need to be trained after having picked a frequency, and then we are trying to order the week so that fatigue patterns become reliable.
All right, if I'm understanding where you're going with this, is it in a way it's kind of similar to Mike Toucher. You're working from the day out.
Exactly.
Instead of working from the meat back.
Exactly.
Right? So when you're working from the day out, that those metrics matter across all programming, but these metrics all need to be anchored pretty quick. Right? So what would be the process of trying to anchor these if it's a new person that's coming in? Right? And obviously if it's the new person that's coming in for you, they've already got some experience. They probably even are working on a little bit higher frequency, right? Which would be different than if it's a new person just coming straight in. What's the priority of what needs to be anchored first?
So I will say, I mean, I don't want to give the mischaracterization that like I'm only programming high frequency. I would say the majority of my lifters are probably squatting 2 days a week. Majority of them are benching 3 to 4, which on the raw side actually is, I think, pretty standard. I don't think you see too many people benching fewer than 3 days. And then deadlift is 1 to 2. But in terms of priority, when someone's coming in, usually what I'm asking for when I'm onboarding someone is I want to see your programming. So share with me the spreadsheets. And then along with the fact that I have your filled out spreadsheets, I want to know which periods of training were just uncharacteristically good and which were uncharacteristically bad. So then now I can get the context in looking at these sheets and be able to say, well, I think I know why this went well, or I think I know why this went poorly. So now I'm forming some initial assumptions about that lifter. Now I get to go to my memory bank of every lifter I've basically ever worked with, right? Someone comes to you, you know their weight class, you know how they move, and you have comparisons you could make to lifters who are already on your roster. And you ask, okay, what have I done with this lifter either that's gone really well or that has gotten me out of the jam that this lifter is currently in? And then that guides you towards sort of that template, right? We could call it a skeleton of a program, let's say, where the first thing, and this is usually my process, is like the first thing I'm anchoring across the week is bench press. Now, the only reason I do that is if someone's doing a lift at a higher frequency, the odds that they can have it feel good on a day that it normally doesn't is lower, right? So if I'm benching 5 days a week and Tuesday always feels great and Saturday always feels like crap, but I compete on a Saturday, you're going to have to do some magic to try to get that meet day on Saturday to feel good. Whereas like you deadlift once a week, you taper, it's you know, like shooting fish in a barrel. So I like to anchor the bench setup first, just so that I know logistically, like, okay, we're going to have the heavy bench day on the Saturday because that's when you're competing. Logistically, maybe your schedule only allots for Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday. And then I will map out squat and deadlift individually. And then I will ask myself, well, what level of interference do I think those two are going to have? Because unless you're a bigger guy, squat and bench press, probably not going to have that much interference, right? When you get bigger, your shoulders, biceps, elbows all become an issue. But for most people, that's not usually the case. But squat and deadlift, right? Those are the ones that can really compete against each other. So you get a guy who has short arms on deadlift. I'm like, okay, that's going to crush his back when he has to deadlift heavy. So I now have to be mindful of where that heavy deadlift goes relative to the heavy squat. So for that kind of lifter, maybe they're on opposite sides of the week. And that's the template I go with. But then you get the lanky guy who's, 5'5" with a 6-foot wingspan, deadlift sumo, opens up his hips like crazy. You're like, all right, his deadlift is probably less taxing than his squat. Like we can probably put the deadlift on the same day as the squat and,
I built Elite FTS in 1998, 27 years ago, with the aim to help educate as many people as I could in strength and conditioning. And the way to do that was to keep all the content complementary. The way that we've been able to do that since day one is by providing the best products possible to help your training program. If you can put the item in a gym bag or load plates on it, we have it and it will work. Everything from SS yoke bars to American press bars, bands. We also have a strength equipment specialist staff that helps outfit home gyms, sport training centers, colleges that have over 3 decades of experience and also have spent a lot of time working as coaches, so they understand the flow of the weight room and how things actually get done. If you're serious about your training and you want to up your game and support the podcast and all the content that we provide, head over to elitefts.com and use the code TABLETALK at checkout to receive 10% off your orders.
Figure out the rest of the week, in a different way. So
how far out of the blocks created for them?
So what exactly do you mean?
Well, where I'm going is if you're, one thing with the frequency is the, given a long enough period of time, a long enough period of compliance, a long enough period of everything being spot on, rest, nutrition, everything, you could build somebody into being able to squat 3-4 days per week, primary movements, heavy throughout the whole block, given all those circumstances, which is probably never going to happen, right? But it's possible, right? And so when you have, if that would be the ultimate goal, which the ultimate goal would be able to have 4 or 5 primary on all the lifts every single week.
I don't think that's the ultimate goal. I don't.
Well,
think that's
from a conditioning standpoint, the ultimate goal is
in this example.
Yeah, in this example, yes. But from the ultimate goal is having a bigger total when it comes around. I mean, that's where we're going with all this. But as you're trying to work and push through that, there's going to be, inward and outward momentum of whatever that frequency is, right? So if you're getting feedback on this weekly basis and say you're getting it on the Saturdays over, Sundays off, then you got to provide that new frequency for the next week on that Monday, right? There's still going to be systemic fatigue from that Friday and that Saturday before you can change whatever's going to happen on that next Monday, right? So where from what you're telling me, it sounds like those changes need to happen pretty quickly, where if it's a whole month that's being built out and being thrown in there, then you have a little bit more leeway on when that change in frequency can happen.
Yeah. So I would not, so I'm glad you asked that question so that I can clarify, is that we want predictability of performance, which means that changing something like frequency is such a wrench in the system. So when we're writing out training, really load is our metric. I mean, it is the metric of whether we're making progress, but load is the metric of progression. So when I'm writing out that week, it is with the intent of progressing that same structure, kind of like Mike Tashir does, right, across a 4-week period, across a 6-week period, and having some progressive intensity build up. But in terms of what people are doing within, or I guess what people are doing across weeks, it's not changing. So I don't have someone, maybe squatting twice a week, 1 week, and then squatting 3. The layout stays the same. We progress the load, and then based on the feedback, because like you brought up, if you bring someone on, there's a whole accumulation period. If you were trying to get someone prepared to lift something more, I try to meet people where they're at. So if someone has benched 3 days a week, they've tried 4, their pecs have bothered them, their shoulders bother them, I'm not going to program them 4. We're going to start with 3, and we're going to figure out how to fill the gaps that they've clearly had on 3. But there are times where you get a lifter who's like, I bench 3 days a week, I never get sore, I push my accessories, but the bar just always feels really heavy in my hands, or I feel like anytime I have to load a single above 90%, like I don't have the technical wherewithal to control it. And then I go and look at the program and I'm like, well, you don't really have any other top set or heavy exposures on those other bench days. So that's going to be my first plan of attack. It's like, I want to give you more heavy exposures to prepare you for the heavy exposure at the end of the week. And that usually gets people going again. And then if that doesn't work, or they've tried that, then I'll consider, even at the point of onboarding someone, yeah, you have all the signs that 3 days just isn't stimulating enough. We're going to just start off at 4.
All right. So if you're manipulating the load on the non-primary days, I'm going to assume the primary days are the competitive lift, right? Am I safe in that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I just want to, I want to clarify. And for those people that are listening that this may be a little bit too far over their head. If it's the secondary or even the tertiary or whatever you want to call those other days, is the load manipulation. It can be both. I get that. Primarily change of movement. For instance, the difference between a high bar and a low bar, or pulling off blocks, or a safety squat bar. A front squat would be a front squat compared to a back squat is the one way to control load, or just control the load.
It's usually control the load. I would say, and I think a lot of us are trying to, kind of because you adopt a system long enough and eventually that's kind of all you see. So we are trying to figure out like, okay, are there problems that we're dealing with certain lifters that could be solved in different ways? So we're trying to do that. But within our systems, I would say nowadays, a lot of us are not in the game of, like you said, managing load by switching movements, because then the fatigue patterns, the distribution of stress across muscles changes, right? If I do a front squat one week and high bar another week, maybe I'm managing load, but where it gets distributed is now different. So I don't want to throw that variable in where I'm trying to see if that competition day is progressing, but what pre-existing conditions were coming into that session have now changed. So usually it's load. I would say, like, let's just, for the sake of having variability, let's say we're using the 3-day-a-week squat structure, right? And you have that undulating structure where it's maybe a secondary and then the tertiary and then the primary. A lot of times that middle session either gets like a load cap or it's just progressed maybe on a bi-weekly basis versus linearly. Because if that day's there just for practice, you could imagine how it could very quickly just become too heavy.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas maybe the secondary, we know, okay, when you actually push this day, we see a positive uptick in the primary. So in terms of maybe percentage, we progress on the primary, maybe it's 5% a week. And then maybe on the secondary, it's 3% a week. And then on the tertiary, maybe it's 0 and then 1, or 0 and then 2. So just the progressions are definitely moderated, but usually through load, I would say, primarily.
Depending on how someone's performing on their main lifts, when you're programming the accessories, would you change their accessories? Basically, if they're too fatigued, like, can you overdo it on accessories to where it's going to hinder your main lifts, and then you kind of have to look at it and pivot from there, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think a good example is, let's talk about somebody like Russell Orhe, world record squatter in the 83 kilo weight class, world record squatter in the 93 kilo weight class. You get someone that jacked on a hack squat and ask them to push it to failure, they're probably going to be out of commission on their squat for a week, 2 weeks, right? Because of how taxing a movement like that would be to introduce. But there are a lot of lifters you're going to work with, especially as like an online powerlifting coach, where the bottleneck for their progress is muscle mass, right? Like, I use the analogy of like, I'm going to bake a cake and the recipe calls for 4 eggs and 2 cups of flour and 2 cups of milk, and I only have 2 eggs. It's like, there's no amount of flour or milk I can add to this recipe that makes up for the fact that I'm missing those 2 eggs. So you get that under-muscled individual, and for them, like, maybe in real time, I'm fatigued from those heavy dumbbell presses or those leg presses, but I come around to my next squat day and it's flying. And you see that real-time progression. But when you have the guys who are maybe, just there's a mismatch of an accessory, right? Like, it's just creating too much fatigue, and you empirically experience that, or they're just jacked and they get a lot out of that accessory, then absolutely would consider pulling it back and, trying to get things under control on the main lift before we start trying to turn that accessory lever.
So if you're seeing technical breakdowns in a newer lifter coming in, or if it's an experienced lifter that it gets dicey, right? Because the experienced lifters may be having the technical breakdowns just because they're injured or hurt, whatever it's going to be. So let's exclude them. But somebody that's coming in that their technique could be better, then where does that work come in? Because if the load is always high, then they're focused to be able to fix that, or the fatigue isn't going to be able to build that. So does it come in the back down sets, or does it come in those other days?
Yeah, I think it comes from multiple different areas. I would say, and I'm sure you have this experience as well, like when you're working with newer guys, like their technique could suck because they just don't have muscle in certain areas. Yeah. And it's like, as you just become a more jacked individual, it's like, oh, I'm actually sitting into my quads and trusting my legs on a squat more because I now have bigger quads. Exactly. So I really like variations as movement constraints for a lot of lifters, because if you're trying to learn something and you have a million things going on in your head, that's a lot harder to execute than if I give you a variation that just puts you in that position. You could just be a dummy and go through it. So in one sense, I love variation for a lot of those types of lifters. But then kind of on the other side of the coin with newer lifters, they just learn quickly. And a problem last week might not be a problem this week. With the more advanced lifters, it obviously gets a bit tougher, because the sort of risk analysis you're running here is like, okay, we have this technical fault that we know has caused us problems. Either we run into an injury over and over, maybe we miss depth in comp, and that, I mean, you do nationals, one missed squat, the meet's over for you, right? Like that's the most important lift of the meet in these national meets and international meets. So the risk analysis though then becomes, well, if I give you this variation and we prioritize it, like what if it doesn't work, right? You're just like, okay, we have something good enough, let's say, although there is no good enough, but we have something good. If we then strip away from that with the hopes that on the other side of this, it'll pay off, what is then the cost if that doesn't play out, And that's not to say I don't go that route.
No, I get it. Yeah.
But it's tough. You got this lifter who's invested 5-7 years into your coaching. Maybe because I'm dealing with this a lot now. My roster, they're all getting older. They're starting families. Their jobs are picking up. They're like, how much can I really be affording to put into this sport anymore? And you want to make sure that the changes that you're making are going to be the ones that, give them the best path to success.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. What if it doesn't work?
With the psycho lifters who this is their whole thing, I mean, you'll do whatever, right? But
yeah.
The majority of your roster, and I mean, a lot of high level lifters, they have other things that they're weighing in the balance. And I've seen so many top 3, top 5 guys who have just left the sport, and I'm sure you have as well.
Oh, sure.
It's just,
I mean, when you get to like where you are now, right? It's a different game.
Yeah.
Right. Because there's the life factors that kind of play into all this, right? To where the hope is by the time you get to that point that you've already established what your minimal effective dose and what your maximal is. And then you realize that the maximal really doesn't have to be utilized as often as what you think it needs to be realized.
Yeah.
And actually believe it, right? That's the dicey thing with that, because all you really need to do is put your best days together, which a lot of times is going to be completely opposite of what you had to do to get there.
Yeah.
Right. Which is kind of this mind play that goes into all this, where so now that we're there, right? So we're at that point to where with your own training, right? And it's still always about getting stronger, but it's more about being able to display your own strength more effectively when it matters. What are the knobs that you personally have to change more frequently now than what you didn't have to in the past?
Yeah. I think there's 2 things. So the biggest hindrance to my progress and what had my total in a long plateau for a while was my squat. I had squatted 300 kilos in my last junior year, back in 2018, and then went on a 5-year regression. I just could not replicate that on the platform, not even close. I think the heaviest I had done prior to the end of 2024 was 285. So we had productive periods of training, never really came together on the platform. And kind of like the example you had just brought up, I eventually had to humble myself and say, something has to change technically. Like, it worked when you were 23, but you are 27, 28. Eventually you're going to be, 30, married, kids. Like, you got to take advantage of the time you have. It's not the world's your oyster anymore, right? So at the end of 2023, I was like, I need to change how I squat, which for me was bringing my stance within and just not bracing as hard as I was, which is kind of like ironic. You think of, newer lifters need to be taught to brace harder. But for me, the issue I was dealing with is I would clamp down super hard, brace really hard. And then as soon as I would descend in my squat, I could not control the barbell. Like I was just shifting, shaking all over the place on my center of mass. So we were like, just be more calm with it. You've been doing this for a decade. Your body knows how to create enough tension. Trust that and just glide down. Those two technique changes, and ironically, just training lighter, took my squat from a 5-year plateau of not being able to hit over 285 in a comp to 307.5 at last year's nationals. So it was just a, complete reversal. And I think a big part of it, obviously these are physical changes, but a big part of it was humility, like learning humility and being able to say like, yeah, I need to not rest on my laurels of, hey, you're this elite level competitor. Like, no, you still have things to learn. And if you want to reach that next level as everyone else is sprouting up and elevating the sport, I mean, the best guy in my weight class right now totals 900, right? Like it's a new sport. So you have to be willing to
well,
learn.
I think that example is kind of exactly what I'm speaking about, because if you go back to where that plateau started
Mm-hmm.
and change that, then that strength probably was always there,
Mm-hmm.
but you weren't displaying it
Mm-hmm.
because of the overbracing or whatever it's going to be. Because
Mm-hmm.
that can impact a lot of things too.
Yeah.
It can impact the speed to which you're lowering, which is
Mm-hmm.
going to change what the stretch reflex is going to be at the bottom, even if it's so. Actually, I mean, you probably analyzed it when you looked at your descent with the overbraced compared to the braced, and you're still bracing by, I don't want to.
Yeah, exactly.
You're still bracing more than most people would realize you need to brace.
Mm-hmm.
And did you see a decrease in the speed when you loosened up a little bit, or an increase in the speed when you loosened up a little bit?
I would say it became way more uniform. So I think the issue I would have in the past was that it would start out controlled and I could not manage the bar in the bottom. So it's like slow, and then just collapse. Whereas now it just feels, maybe it's somewhere in the middle between those two speeds, but it's just this glide.
Yeah.
Like it feels like you're just out in front of the bar the whole descent. You can trust your legs. The bar doesn't feel like it's whipping as much, which was a huge thing for me. Like anytime I would get over, and it's not even a ton of weight, but anytime I would put 600 plus pounds on the bar in comp, it just felt like I had a deadlift bar on my back. And then once I fixed that bracing issue, it just completely went away.
Was that whipping more oscillation or was it more up and down?
I mean, it felt like both, but I think it felt like it took me forward and back on my center of mass more. So,
all right. So why did you not look towards the lats? Most people in that situation, right, they're going to default to, the lats, and bracing, right? So they're going to default to, for the bracing, obviously wasn't a problem. How did you know that wasn't a problem?
Because my bracing was outrageous. Like people, like this was like a thing for, so let me go back. At the end or the middle of 2019, I tore my meniscus on a belt squat and I rehabbed it really quickly, but mentally I became terrified of squatting. Like as I would get under the bar, I would brace and I'm like, because I got back to squatting really quickly after that injury. I think I rehabbed it in maybe like 2 months. I would brace and I'm like, what if my knee just gives out? So the habit I developed was I would take my air in and then hold that brace for like 5 seconds. So there are people at meets or people in the comment section on posts being like, I thought the video paused with how long you're bracing. So I had taken it to such an extreme that no one in their right mind would do. I knew that needed to be scaled back.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a thing of once that got scaled back because it was just so egregious, everything cleared up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if we were just to look at one metric of the time under tension, you just added 5 seconds to it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Do you have any case examples of bench presses that are in the same realm as what you just described? If it was you or a client?
What do you mean exactly?
To where what was holding it back wasn't as obvious as what people would think it would be. Right? To where, looking at what you were saying, the default is going to be you're not bracing hard enough, your lats aren't strong. Where on the bench, you know, people would think it's positioning, right? That's kind of the default, right? The default is going to be, look, it's your positioning sucks.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to kind of look there. And then why does the positioning suck?
Yeah.
But it may not be that. It may be more the transfer.
Well, I'll take this a different direction, but it is an interesting case because it was kind of going back to what Noah was asking. I think the most common thing I've seen with bench, because this is kind of a nonsensical case, is you get a lot of lifters who maybe fall into that category of being under-muscled, or maybe not even under-muscled, but they're just not the most jacked they could possibly be. And actually adding more accessory work, even when it looks kind of oddly placed, would yield better progress on the main lifts. And kind of what I mean by that is, you know, let's say you have a 4-day-a-week bench press layout and you've done the logical thought process of, okay, well, if my heavy bench day is on Saturday and I bench, you know, let's say Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do really heavy bodybuilding stuff that's going to be more fatiguing, I'm probably going to put it on the Saturday, or I'm going to put it on the Monday. Like, I want to space it out away from that heavy exposure, make sure I can recover. But then you get some people where you introduce a new movement maybe on a Thursday, or you are getting to the end of a block and you tell someone, you know what, I want you to actually push that accessory harder. So rather than sort of pull back on all the auxiliary stuff, I want you to turn it up a bit. And you do that and you see this training response where you're like, whoa, we just saw a 3% uptick from not just the previous weeks, but even relative to old blocks. Like your performance on this week was significantly stronger and you felt it. There are times where, like I said, really pushing someone in a maybe counterintuitive way on certain accessories or the intensity on days that maybe don't make sense to has yielded progress. So, and this is something I think I've learned from the high frequency bench pressing system, because, you know, when you're squatting 1 day a week, 2 days a week, like the expected response usually is reality. You know, it's like, okay, I did too much. I got fatigued. We got to pull back. But things get really dicey and funky when you're benching every day. Like sometimes the 5th day in a row you're benching feels like the strongest, and then the day after you have a day of rest feels the weakest, and all this weird stuff happens. So one of the things that's common, and I don't coach a lot of lifters who bench high frequency. Like I said, I think the average is probably in that 3 to 4 range. But I have a couple guys that are in that 5-day. I think I have one who's on 6 days. And you have these day before heavy bench days where you're taking heavy singles as well. Like it might be, I'm planning for a 205 single, 205 kilo single on a Saturday. And the whole block we've done practice singles with like 170 kilos on Friday. And then we're just falling flat on that Saturday, just over and over. I'm like, you know what? Let's go 185. Let's go 187 on that Friday. And like, problem solved. It's like all that latent strength just magically unearthed itself.
Well, I think you kind of just, you open the door to one of the bigger, actually probably the biggest criticism that I hear from gym owners that have lifters in their space that are high frequency USAPL. And this is kind of the same bitch across the board. Granted, I'm not in these gyms. I don't see this. So, it's all kind of like hearsay. So I take all that with a grain of salt. Is that, these kids, usually younger, they'll come in and they're training the 4 or 5 days per week. It takes them fucking, an hour and a half to get through their squats because they got to rest 10 minutes between sets.
And let me tell you, that should not take that long.
Yes. Okay. We're going to hit the whole gamblet here, right? And they don't really do any fucking accessory work whatsoever. Where these gym owners are like, if they would just fucking train harder, do some accessory work to actually build muscle.
Yep.
Because all the doubles and singles and triples that they're doing 5 days a week isn't doing shit.
Yep.
And eat more, because a lot of them are really underdeveloped.
Yep.
Right. And I get the weight classes are weird. I get it, but if you're 6'3" and you're 148, you probably need to gain weight.
Yep.
And those end up being the bigger criticisms because they run in packs.
Yeah.
When they do that, and they're in the fucking Sour Patch Kids, so that kind of plays into it as well.
Yeah.
So let's dive into all that.
Yeah. So I will say I'm very serious about prescribing my accessories, and a conversation I always have to have with lifters is like, you are dogging it on your accessories. Like, you absolutely need to turn up the intensity on those. And I think just as a sort of algorithm or like a system for programming is like, I'm going to exhaust the accessory resources first before I go and say, yeah, we need to add a whole extra day, right? I think that just makes sense. And, the thought process that I usually try to have as well is I'm always asking myself, like, what is the main bottleneck for progress right now? Like the cake baking recipe thing. It's like, is your technique in check? Are you recovering? Is your, tendons, like, are you like durable in your connective tissue? Do you need more muscle? So like you mentioned, a lot of times people fall into that category where maybe it's not the main bottleneck, but muscle probably is a main bottleneck for the majority of people, right? For myself as well. So it's like, that's always something that we can exploit to a greater degree before we have to say, yeah, let's add another bench day or add another squat day. It's usually only when, let's say we have a 3-day-a-week bench layout, it's only when I'm pushing you on accessories, maybe all 3 of those days, and you're still like, I don't feel like I'm doing anything all week. It's like, all right, then I guess we have to add another day, but that's not the...
Well, how do you anchor the effort that they're actually putting into those for your feedback? Because we can anchor the effort of the main lift kind of based upon the percentage, or bar speed if you're measuring that. There's mechanisms to anchor that. You can't anchor how much effort they really put into this set of 8 to 12.
Yeah. From a programming standpoint, I'll use reps in reserve, but if I have a suspicion that, and I just had this conversation actually with a lifter, if I have a suspicion that like you're just not pushing your hack squats, I see the weight that you're putting into the sheet, and maybe I'm thinking to myself like, okay, I know people who squat as much as that, but they're doing way more on the hack. Send me a video of your hack squat. And I see the video and I'm like, do you think that had 1 to 2 reps in reserve? Like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, you're going to do an AMRAP next week. Let's see how many you do. And then they go from doing sets of 10 at RPE 8 to now they've done a set of 25. And you're like, oh, okay, that's interesting. So that probably is not the right load for that rep prescription. Now you have a new gauge on how hard you should be pushing.
I just want to take a moment to let you know about our crew. What our crew is, it allows the show to stay independent, and it's the reason why the podcast is still here now. The podcast is free to listen to, but it's not free to produce. It keeps going because of the sales through elitefts, our show sponsors, but more importantly, our crew members. The reason I love this is for many reasons, is it keeps the show independent. So I can pick who I want to speak to. I can pick what topics I want to speak to, and I don't have to be accountable to anybody. I just go off what the crew members want and what the audience wants, and I don't have to deal with all the other bullcrap that's associated with the podcast world. In return, what you get with the crew is ad-free episodes that are released a day ahead of time. You get access to our Discord community, which has AMAs, like 60 ebooks. We try to put a new ebook out every single month. Access to our coaching community with form checks, training Q&As. It also gives you invitations to our training retreats that are out here in the gym once or twice a year. 76% of all the people that joined in 2022 are still members now. Right now, you can either go month to month or get 2 months free with an annual plan. Just look for the link in the description, look at the QR code, or search elitefts.com crew and join today. It means a lot.
And when that happens, that's usually the precursor to that lift then taking off, whatever it was, because we now know that all the other things that we had in check are truly in check, but this was the one weak link in the system that you just were not capitalizing on.
I'm trying to think through that, because one of the first things that went through my mind was, is that the right movement that they should be doing? You know, if they're that far off, you know, is it too stabilized? You know, which I think for hypertrophy, you kind of want it the most stabilized you can, you know, to where if it was something like it's for the quads, like a goblet squat, or, you know, something that would be easier for them to gauge the RP. Either way, they still need to train fucking harder, right? It's just, I like to geek out and try to think, because it always seems to happen on things like that, right? Where if you're trying to anchor somebody on, like a leg extension is pretty easy, right? Everybody knows how to fail on that, right? You can yell all they want, it ain't going to go anywhere. A leg press, a hack squat, certain movements are just prone that you can do 10 more reps if somebody but I don't know if that's for you. I don't know if that's a good thing. Right. So that's where I was saying earlier that the shit that you had to do when you were younger is different than the shit that you have to do now. Now, if it's, say, you doing a leg press, it's like, oh man, we need to kind of get you to this failure as quickly as we can with the least amount of joint damage that we can accumulate with that. But I think that happens. Actually, what happens more frequently than anything is they just don't do it. Because the rest periods on the main stuff is too long. Their training density sucks. Right. So do you prescribe that? You know, right about what the rest should be?
It's a conversation. It's not necessarily something where, like, in my spreadsheets I have, hey, you need to rest 5 minutes or something. But there are times where, you know, a lifter maybe sends, you know, they're sending me footage and I see the messages coming through, and maybe it's the end of the day and I see that the timestamp for a squat was, I don't know, 4 p.m. And then I see the timestamp for bench was 6:45. And I'm like, how long did your workout take today? And they're like, I was in the gym 3.5, 4 hours. I'm like, it should take you 2 hours at most to get through your squat, bench, and some accessories. I'm like, this absolutely needs to change. So like I said, I've had that conversation many times with lifters because, like you said, the stereotypical like USAPL crowd that shows up to the gym with their candy and all that, they yap, they, you know, take 10, 15 minutes between every set that.
Well, is that real? You know, when you say stereotypical, I can fall back on that and say, well, there's going to be stereotypes with the multiply people too. And I know most of those. Some are real, but most aren't. You know, so it's, in your opinion, would you say that is more real than not?
Yeah, I do think it's a problem. I live in Dallas and there's a gym, love the owners, love the gym. And I love the people who train there. Like they're all great people. But I left the gym because the pace that people would move at was it was a drain on you, where you're waiting to use a rack and people are maybe working within 5 or 10 kilos of each other and you have them all spread out on separate racks. You know, there's a lot of talking. There's a lot, you know, it doesn't have that intensity that, and again, maybe it's because I'm just older than all of them. They're all young kids. This is a social. And I get it. It's like, this is probably the first for a lot of kids, you know, one of the first like cohesive social groups that they have had. Maybe they didn't play a sport in high school. So I want them to have that experience. But just for me, when I'm coming in and I'm like, headphones on, I'm from bar to 650 on squat in 15, 20 minutes tops. Like there's just a level of intensity that I need to be able to train at. And I would rather train completely alone without spotters or without people to hype me up than to train with people who are just moving slow.
What are some of the other things that you've seen with powerlifting culture on your side since you've been in? Some of the other changes? Because it's grown tremendously since you came in.
I do think there is more, like I think people are taking the bodybuilding stuff more seriously. You know, you think about when I started powerlifting, to try to find a combo rack, to try to find kilo plates, it was impossible. And now every gym is that, right? So back then, your, you know, holy grail gym that you find just looks like a box with a combo and a power bar and kilo plates. And I think nowadays people are realizing like, okay, if I want to really maximize progress, now whether or not they put in the effort to get there is a different story, but they at least recognize the reality of I need a gym that has enough machines and I need to make that a bigger percentage of my training. So I do think that is actually a genuine shift that has happened. It's a funny kind of aside is, in coming here and seeing all the bands and the chains, a couple of my coach friends and I have been having the conversation about kind of the role accommodating resistance could play within more modern powerlifting program, but we're like, gyms don't even have anywhere to set it up anymore. Like it always was the case that you had squat cages or deadlift platforms that had the attachments, and now it's like any powerlifting gym you go to, you can't even rig it up if you wanted to.
Yeah, and the combo, right? Yeah, because the combo rack, nor would you want to.
Yeah.
Right? Because if it's bands on the combo rack, and
it's
it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
What are some of the other changes that you've seen outside of just more of the hypertrophy work? Because a lot's happened, throughout. I don't want to say that the tested side has been without its drama, because it always has had it, right? People don't know their history, so they don't know how it even came about in the first place. But how do you, because how have you navigated that, right? Because that split was a big thing. Was it 3 years ago?
I think it was 2021. So about 5 years ago, the split happened.
Yeah. So you're right. I mean, you're there in your prime, right?
You're
still in your prime, right? This is a more this is a dicey thing, more so for you guys than everybody else.
Yeah.
Right. Because you have these, and as a coach, right, there's that bullshit that was kind of part of all that. How did you navigate that, and how did you come to the conclusion of where you landed?
Yeah. So the simple answer is that I'll go wherever the competition is. And I think that's how powerlifters kind of responded to this. So, after the split happened, ironically, most of the high level lifters stayed in the USAPL. And the reason for that was at the time, and it still is the case in a lot of weight classes, but at the time, if you were a top 5 93 or a top 5 83, you probably could win worlds if you went to worlds. So there was not really sense in having a mass exodus to Powerlifting America if the best lifters in the world truly were all stateside. So that was one element of it. And then the second was that the USAPL at the time was promising this big sort of pro series production, basically the prestige and the production value that Sheffield provided. That's what they were sort of promising. So a lot of people stuck around for a while, and then we realized that wasn't really going to happen. So then you get one guy who leaves, and then you get the guy in your weight class leaves, and then you're like, okay, you look around, you're like, what are you guys going to do? And they're like, I don't know, what are you guys going to do? And it becomes this prisoner's dilemma where you're like, well, we just want to compete against the best lifters. Like, I don't care if I'm going to win $5,000 at this meet, $10,000 at this meet. It means nothing to me if the best guy in the world just put up a 20 kilo better total than I did at a different competition. And that's always been the ethos, I think, on the tested side, is like the head to head within a weight class is more important than anything else to people. So for me, it was, I stuck around in the USAPL maybe for 1 year longer than I wanted to competitively. And the reason for that was the year that I left, so 2023 Nationals, I had across my roster and then my coach's rosters, I think we had 45 lifters doing USAPL Nationals. And because of Article 14, which was like the non-compete rule that the IPF instituted, I couldn't justify being like, hey guys, I'm going to go compete. By the way, I won't be able to come to Nationals now and handle. So after that year, I had told everybody, hey, I'm going to leave. And kind of organically with that, as everyone else started to leave, it became more enticing even as an average competitor to go to Powerlifting America, because every Nationals, you're kind of turning into a mini vacation so that you can be with all of your friends and watch the high level lifters. So once every weight class got populated on the Powerlifting America side, the sort of middle of the pack, or maybe not elite, but upper quartile lifters were like, well, I'd rather go to nationals and see good lifters lift than go to this other nationals and make it an in and out trip.
And you had the numbers per weight class, because those meets are not based upon coefficient.
Yeah.
Right. Where, the tested side, it seems to fall that way because there's only a limited amount of prize money and they're going to go based upon coefficient. So the depth per weight class isn't really there. Right. Where you have the depth per weight class. Do you still have I guess that's what I'm asking. Is there still the depth per weight class?
Oh yeah, there's still, yeah, absolutely. I think at this point, pretty much everybody who's competitive is on the Powerlifting America side. So the weight classes are, I mean, realistically, you see the more popular weight classes where the top 8 lifters have what was like a world record total maybe a year or two prior. So it's really, really blown up.
Now, does that depth hold all the way down through into most of the states? So if you're going to the Ohio, whatever, or does it fall apart at the national or regional level?
Yeah, I don't think it holds up at the state level, because right now with Powerlifting America, they don't have a foothold around the country, right? So like USAPL, and a big reason why the people who do stay USAPL are still there is that there have been meet directors over the years that have just built these awesome communities. And it's like, if you're in New Hampshire or you're in Maine or even Massachusetts, like USAPL is crushing it there, right? You're going to have a great meet, great production value. Maybe there's going to be prize money. That you're going to have good handlers, judges, etc. Like it's going to be a well done thing. Whereas there, like I said, there are other states that there's just nobody who is like the Powerlifting America guy. So what it's looked like on the Powerlifting America side is just, if I need to qualify for nationals and there's nothing near me, I'll drive to the next state over, just do the meet, get in and get out. And then nationals is really the only meet that's,
now, do you have to
prepared for.
Requalify every year, or if you're in the top 3, you don't? How's that work?
So I think your total qualifies you for the year. So if you have posted a total at nationals, you would then qualify for the next nationals, assuming that your total beat whatever the qualifying total was. Yeah.
That's how, when I first came in, it was just USPF.
Yeah.
And I guess there might've been AAU or some shit like that. And the whole trajectory, and this is what attracted me into the sport, was the junior nationals had a qualifying total, and then there was nationals had the qualifying total. So the whole thing was to get into nationals, right? And at the time it would be APF or ADFPA.
Yeah.
And the APF, for obvious reasons, was, the direction that I went, but it's also what I came up through, as I noted earlier. And the depth was always there, right? So if it was just getting there was like the first thing, just get to the show. Like, I don't give a fuck if I'm last, I'm there, right? And then when you're there, at least hit enough to be able to qualify, to be able to come back the next time, so you don't have to deal with doing more meets. Because I did learn that probably later than I should, but far enough off. And then work up. Can I get top 5? Can I get top through? Just work up through the ranks. But then over a period of time, there became so many different federations that it's just like, the fuck, there's, flick it off.
I was like, what am I doing with this?
Yeah. Where that's a big thing.
Yeah.
Having the bulk of the people, because if somebody's new, they just qualify and they come in and they are 7th. Well, the next year they're doing better if they just get 6th or 5th, right? It's even if the total, what I'm saying, even if the total is not better, which sucks, right? Because you always want that total to be better, but you want that other anchor. Like, winning matters.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a thing, especially when you're at a national level, because you're dealing with other people that are in kind of the same boat that you are, outside of the younger freaks that just get there really quick and you're just kind of fucked. You have to just kind of outlast them. But going back to what I was saying earlier, what are the variables that you have to manipulate, to be able to make sure that you go into the next meet the healthiest you can, to be able to display the strength?
Yeah. I think the big thing that I've always focused on is, my diet has always been like a huge just honestly, even aside from training, just a big personal, I guess, passion or something that I really try to hold myself to a strict standard to. I am, and this is just a fact, is like, I think I'm the only person who has been in the same weight class in this sport as long as I have been, who is at the top still. I think back to 2015, which was when I first did my first nationals, and I look at kind of the field of competitive lifters at the time, and really the only person who's still around competing at a high level is Ashton Ruska, and he's gone up 2 weight classes since then.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I've kind of stuck around in this same weight class, and the argument obviously could have been made like, well, if you went up, maybe you'd be this much stronger or whatever. But I think one of the big elements that's maybe kept me healthy and able to recomp and make progress is just never slacking on my diet. I can think about what I looked like at 190 when I was 19 and what I look like at 190 at 29, and it's a very different frame.
How hard is it now for you to make weight?
It's honestly about the same. I've not really gotten to the point of I think the heaviest I've ever cut from for 83 is maybe 87 kilos, so about 4 kilos. But I usually, ironically, I think nowadays I feel better making the cut from a lighter weight class, from a lighter body weight. I think when I was younger, I actually felt like I could make the cut from 87, 83 and feel fine.
Well, you have same day weigh-ins, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Whereas nowadays,
you don't have a lot.
I prefer, being like 86 and
sure.
Yeah.
Where it's, because I did notice that when I was looking through your open powerlifting history is it's hard to stay in the same weight class, man, because you're going to put on muscle each year, so what typically happens is it gets harder and harder and harder and harder unless you're recomping more and more and more each year.
Yeah.
Where, you haven't got to that place to, granted, if you had 24-hour weigh-ins, this may be a different conversation.
Yeah.
Because then you would have more freedom to be able to make what happens is people end up making bigger and bigger cuts because they keep getting bigger and bigger each year.
Yep.
And then the cut just becomes so draining on what they're doing, and it can't happen in a same day weigh-in.
Yeah.
24 hours, you can do a lot of manipulation, but even with that, it can get to this point of such diminishing returns that you're not able, and then people move up too late.
Yeah.
But it's why have you not gone up? Because that's like untapped. If I'm looking at that and I'm like, man, if he just went up one weight class, you don't know what can happen.
So there's a couple things here. I think the first is that I had a rival that I wanted to beat, right? When Russell Orr, he was an 83, him and I kind of like early on kind of came up together into the spotlight. And in those first few years of battling it out, it was just, he was 1, I was 2. And that was just the story every year. Some years it was like, oh, Sean really might get it. And halfway through the meet, you're like, oh yeah, he's going to, and then it didn't happen. So there was just this undying urge. And like I mentioned before, like the weight class competitiveness on the tested side, I think just, it's something that matters more to the lifters. And for me, my thought process was just, I want to win the 83s. And I think second to that, if you looked at the sport, and it's actually changed a little bit, which I'll get into in a second, but for a long while, the best guys in every weight class were always people who sat a good bit over the weight class and made, that like 3 to 5% body weight cut. Across the board, that was the case. So that was a good reason to say, well, if I'm in that range, I can probably maximize my potential here. But I think a shift is actually happening now, where now that the sort of genetic ceiling of like what a freak could look like in powerlifting has been established, there's sort of a leveling off now where the guys who are now winning, you look at, Joe Borenstein coming in and totaling 900 at 83, Taylor Atwood moving up a weight class, Russell moving up a weight class. I think now what we're going to see on the men's side in particular is the guys who move up now. So they've built a career and then later on decide to move up, maybe a little fluffier, right? You don't have a crazy 6-pack or anything, but those are going to be the totals that, blow up the world record for the next weight class up. So we'll see what happens. I mean, you are right. That is absolutely untapped potential.
Yeah. So you're not saying one way or another.
No.
A lot of that plays into how, because you guys have different weight classes. So it's what, 83?
83, yeah.
And then it goes to 93.
Yep.
So 10 pounds. So in 93, you need to be like 200,
205.
or 205 to be able to cut down. Sometimes that's a lot of muscle to be able to put on.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for some of them, if they're fighting it that hard, it's just like, they're kind of already there, right? Then they just put on a couple more pounds.
Yep.
Where leverage has changed too.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another thing to kind of play into that whole thing. Have you, in the off seasons that you've had in the past few years, have you let your weight get around a little over 200? Hey guys, I just wanted to take a moment because we do read the comments, and one of them that keeps popping up more frequently than not is, I can't believe this video doesn't get more views. Take a minute to subscribe, leave a comment, and share. It really does help.
Never over 200. And I think if I did, I think that's where I would start to see some meaningful progress. Because I think everybody has what I would call maybe like a zone of like stability and zones of volatility, where it's like, if I'm within this weight range, whether I'm on the low end or the higher end, like training probably goes about the same. And then you break one way and training falls off a cliff, or you break the other way and it blows up. And I've let myself, one year, I got up to like maybe 89 kilos morning weight. So I was up, 2.5 kilos from where I normally sat. And I don't think I felt particularly stronger than I did at maybe 87 kilos, but I could feel a lot of that was like, it was bloat. You get that feeling of, I got to go one hole looser on squat. So I don't think it was weight that truly, settled onto my body. And, what we were doing training wise was just more of the same of what we were doing. It's not like we said, okay, we're going to gain weight, so we're going to spend time focusing on hypertrophy. But yeah, I definitely think that getting over 200 would do me well for sure.
All top powerlifters, and by that I'm going to mean people that would be in the top 5% through any of the disciplines, multiply, single ply, raw, whatever you want to say, they all follow the same bell curve, right? I call it the meathead bell curve, right? And some will deny it, some won't. And it's how it's prioritized in your life, right? So it's always a top priority, right? Some will say it's not their top priority. They're lying. It's their top priority. Other things might be even with it, but it's kind of the top priority. But it's only prioritized in the things that they conveniently want it to be prioritized in, right? That serve them best. So if it's on the untested side, definitely it's prioritized and taking tons of shit and all this other kind of stuff, but it's not prioritized in the how a social community can help build and lower their stress to be able to help their training become better. It's not prioritized in the nutritional aspects, which can help recovery, which helps the training become better. It becomes compartmentalized, right? Which it should be, right? Because if you want to be great at something, you're going to have to put everything into that one thing. But a lot of times that when it's compartmentalized into that one thing, and it is pulling things like, I'm not doing shit with my family, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing this, I'm not doing all that. You're taking that social part, which a group of people can help propel you more than you by yourself. But you don't learn that until later. Right. So where do you fall on this curve now? Right. Because the interesting thing is that's that next peak, right? You get that first beginner gains and you get the other gains. Then those other gains to where that next pop usually comes in when they realize that what they thought was all in was just conveniently all in on the shit they wanted to be all in on, and not the things that really matter the most. And then that pops.
I mean, on the topic of the team and the support, I mean, I'm dying for something like that. I feel like that's so hard to come by.
It can be online, it's just a community.
No, for sure. But I think from experience, it's when you can train with people who are just as one track minded about their training as you are, it makes such a difference. And, coming from a baseball background, right? it's a team sport, and it's probably one of the like more team-oriented team sports, because it doesn't matter how good any one individual is. It's like the whole system has to be moving together. And, you know, powerlifting has definitely, I think, lost that outside of like the collegiate programs. Once you're in a gym as your own independent lifter, it's, you know, everyone is kind of mentally on their own. And I think a big part of it, and I know we were kind of talking about this before the podcast, is I think a lot of people would stick around longer if they had that kind of team environment to powerlifting. You know, I don't think the online stuff is enough. Like, you could be a lifter on the team of another coach, and you know these other people, and you're going to see them at big meets, but to have someone literally in person be like, hey, you dogged it on that set of leg press, or, you know, get your mind right for this next squat. Like, it's a different story. And I think one of the big elements of it is you feel like you have an obligation to something bigger than yourself, right? Like, people ride off of feelings when determining whether or not they're going to do something. Do I feel excited or motivated to train? All right, if that's low, then I'm going to put less effort into training. Do I feel the same spark in my marriage that I used to feel? Okay, I don't, so I'm going to put less effort into my, like, people are so feelings driven. And I think by having a community, that whole ethos gets turned toward, no, like, this is my group. These are the people I'm obligated to put my best foot forward. And I think that's a much more, that's like a foundation on rock that keeps people, you know, putting their best foot forward in whatever it is they're doing.
I do wonder with that, you know, say the instance where you have 5 combo racks being used, 5 different people all using relatively close to the same weight, same bar height, and, you know, everything is pretty much all the same, but they don't. I wonder all the variables that play into that. Like, one of the variables I could see that plays into that is time. You know, they just want to get in and get out, but we kind of already established that's bullshit, right?
Yeah.
You know, so that's not that. Wanting to stick to the program, right? So if say somebody's program has compound sets or whatever it is, and it's going to take longer in a rotation for that person to go. So you'd be like, what the fuck are you doing? You know, you get it. So it kind of plays into that. And so I wonder if the programming kind of plays into it, that, well, I'm working with this coach, so I have to do this. You're working with this coach, so you have to do that. Yeah. Right. Which is kind of a stupid reason, but I could see that kind of playing into it. Yeah. Like, I have to stick to whatever my plan is. And I would think that spotting, you know what I'm saying? Like, one of the major reasons that I always had other people to train with me was to have somebody to fucking spot. Yeah. Like, people are fearless anymore. They don't give a fuck if they have a spotter or not. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. It's like, it doesn't matter. They just go. So I don't know. Yeah. You know, I don't know. I do think it would help. Yeah. It can also hurt, you know, but hurt just by, you get in the right group of people, things start feeling well. Now you're doing stupid shit that you shouldn't be doing, but which is going to bring us back to this RPE thing. Cause it's one of the things I'm always interested in. When I have the clinics, I like to anchor what I call effort and intensity. So intensity percentage of a 1 rep max, have them really max out. Effort would be like the bodybuilding stuff. And somebody I was speaking to last week, we were talking about the RP, and I never thought about this, is I understand the context to which everybody uses it, where he had another level to where it was, he wanted to know what their perceived RPE was before they did the set, right? So if it was listed as a 7.5 and they're working up on that weight, and then what did they think based upon their warm-ups that was going to be? And then what was it after they actually did it? And then what was the difference between that? Because you may see 7.5, but in your head, you're like, man, this is probably going to feel like a fucking 6, right? Yeah. And then you did it and it felt like an 8. And then you have this difference, right? Then it's trying to close the gap on what that difference is. Have you ever played around with anything like that with the people you work with?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. That's what makes RPE reliable in my mind. So, whenever you work with a lifter for the first time who maybe hasn't had the experience either with a coach or with RPE, I mean, the whole, like a big piece of the learning process is me asking you to self-reflect on that RPE and me telling you you're either right or you're wrong. Because I think one of the big advantages to RPE is that you can assess, I think that you can assess your readiness much better if you're able to accurately predict RPE, right? So if you're able to load your last warm up, move it at whatever speed it moves at, and you can pinpoint, hey, I'm going to put 25 kilos on this and it's going to move a 7.5. That is an indicator that you have a strong grasp on your performance on that day. Like you can make good decisions for yourself, maybe when I'm not there, but at the very least, you now know how your performance is trending. And going back to the feedback piece about lifters, maybe relaying, hey, bar felt a little bit heavier or my legs felt a little bit weaker. I think as you learn how to use RP more reliably, you get a better understanding of how to answer those questions and give better feedback there. Because, I've worked with lifters who are maybe on the newer side and you ask them how they feel, they're like, good. Like they don't, everything's gray, right? You don't have the mental memory bank of, yeah, I've loaded 405 on squat 10,000 times. I know exactly what I'll be capable of based on how that, like you said earlier on, you take 60%, you kind of know what kind of day you're going to have. I think if you don't have that experience, you're going to be clueless. So I'm often asking lifters for what they thought it was, or I know what the prescription was. They send me a video and say, here's a bench single at RP6. And I'm like, that was like an 8, dude. I don't know what you're talking about 6. And, when I prescribe it, I know there's some variation with it, but I interpret it strictly as 10 minus reps in reserve.
I like the way that you explained that it's just gray, because if they're coming from just a hypertrophy only training world, right? They it's heavy.
Yeah.
Like that's all they really know. It's heavy, it's not heavy, but there's levels of heavy.
Yep.
Right. But they don't even know they exist yet. So you got to help them to be able to determine
exactly
what these different levels of heavy are, then how to kind of manage those. How long does it, now, if you had somebody in person, obviously you're going to be able to do it quicker. How long does it take to be able to kind of get a good anchor on that for the person that you're talking about?
I mean, it really doesn't take that long, but I will say, I mean, RPE is always implicitly percentage, right?
Sure.
And vice versa,
Yes.
right? Like if you're treating RPE like reps in reserve, so strictly
they're all three the same
to yeah. If you're treating RPE strictly as reps in reserve and not some weird subjective feeling like some people do, even though it is perceived, it's still anchored in something objective. It corresponds to bar speed, and whatever corresponds to bar speed corresponds to percentage most of the time, right? Some people can really grind through reps, but that's a different story. You start to get to a point where you're like, hey, the reason I think that this RPE was overshot is that you look at the percentage you jumped from your last warm-up and it was a 12% jump or a 10% jump. You're like, if you go and look at the RPE to percentage charts, like if you wanted an RPE increase of 1, like you would jump 4% or something like that. So they're always intertwined. It's not like I'm divorcing the percentage world or the bar velocity world from RPE and we're just working with these nebulous numbers from 5 to 10, right? There's always a correspondence there. I think it just gives the lifters really more of like a self-sufficiency and an ability to, assess their readiness on a day compared to, well, coach says I have 85%. You feel like absolute garbage. And then, you load 85% and get stapled. And you're like, well, I don't know what happened. I guess I didn't feel good.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, that becomes the other weird world to navigate. Some days it's not going to feel good. It is. Some days it feels really good. It's not.
Yep.
Some meets you think you're ready for go like shit.
Yep.
Some meets you think you're going to do shitty, end up being your best.
Yep.
And then you got to go back and kind of analyze all that to figure out what it all means. So and I know you've competed a lot. So I know you've had the meets that you thought were going to be your shit and they ended up being well. Then you go back and reflect on it. When you reflect on it, why do you think it went well?
Yeah.
Can be any meet that you think back on.
Arnold 2019 was a prep that went pretty poorly. That actually went really well. And I think a big part of it was fatigue related, which is like a very straightforward answer. But squat, even prior to my meniscus injury, and that whole plateau period, was always still the lift that just made me the most nervous in a comp. Like once squats are over, we're good to go. And I actually had like a pretty good squat progression leading into 2019, but then prep kind of rocky. And I ended up getting stapled with my last squat of prep. And it was a squat that I had hit the week prior and had smoked it. And, meet day, I'm like, all right, I'm, I hope I can hit this. We're going to plan for this, but wasn't really sure. And it was a 650 squat. I ended up, smoking it on the platform, kind of like I did 2 weeks out. And obviously reflecting back on it, I was looking at like the total volume I was doing, the fact that I was riding this baseline level of strength from the end of 2018 that was so high. That whole prep, I just probably accumulated fatigue a bit too early riding into that final week, where I'm thinking like, yeah, we have one more gear before comp, and I was toast. So yeah, that's one I could think of for sure. But I've had, on the flip side of that, Vegas Nationals in 2022, I had the prep of my life and it went terribly. Yeah, I looking back, I think a big part of it was almost a similar thing as to what I mentioned in 2019, where we were kind of at the end of our momentum, as I would call it, as we were going into comp. So we had probably 3 blocks preceding the final block of prep that were just stellar, like firing on all cylinders on all 3 lifts. Like in training, I had hit a 300 kilo squat again for the first time since 2019. Deadlift was around 750, which at the time would have been, a 10 kilo PR on the platform. Bench, I was hitting 220 kilos basically every week, like just unbelievable training. And in that final block, I think right before it started, that was kind of like the end of the road in momentum, where there clearly needed to be a reset, but we just didn't have the runway to have that reset. So prep was good because, it was riding off of this strong period. But by the time I got to the meet, I was just flat. I didn't feel beat up. There was just nothing left. Like if the meet were 4 weeks earlier, 5 weeks earlier, it probably would have been the best day ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that becomes interesting when you look at it in hindsight.
Yep.
And you can see how the 1 6-month period has impact on the next 6-month period to a greater degree than what we really think.
Yeah.
It really does, and then it leads back into the decisions that you make, especially when you're programming forward like you are.
Yeah.
Right. Because you got to program forward, but at the same time, you still got to be looking at what happened in the back.
Yep.
Which it's the benefit of programming forward, right? Because you can kind of see where you are in this full quadrennial is really what it ends up being. Is each one of these phases are in 4 or 5 year period blocks, how they kind of all play out. And where you sit in those things is always, it's interesting to be able to, you can nerd out on it too much. Right?
Oh yeah. I could talk about this forever.
Which
we'll be here another.
Which ends up being like, which of the knobs are the most important to be able to do this? And it's never the one you think it is. And it ends up being this other one. So it's an interesting type of play with all that. So what are you training for now?
So, you put me on the spot here now. So I didn't want to mention it, but because this is going to be out in May and that's around the time that I'll be posting stuff again, I am going to move up a weight class. I am going to go to the 93 kilo weight class. I've not said that publicly anywhere. So right now I'm not really training for anything. I'm just taking this whole next year to try to put weight on. I spent the last several weeks, months losing a little bit to just have a good base to start from, and we'll just see how this next year goes.
So just kind of feeling it out, seeing what the leverages are going to be, seeing where your work capacity goes.
Although I think the leverages will be nice just because I have a very small waist. So like managing squat, especially when you're a little bit leaner or smaller, it's tough. So I'm sure having just a little bit extra will feel will feel nice for sure.
Oh, will help that for sure.
Yeah.
It'll help the bench too.
Mhm.
The deadlift might get a little bit dicey, but
Yeah.
you're still not talking. It's not like you're going from 181 to 250.
Yeah.
So it's not that big of a difference with that.
Mhm.
So with that being in mind, then how does your hypertrophy work change?
Mhm.
Or the reason I'm asking, because part of me is like, it really doesn't have to, because your macros are you're going to grow just based upon the increase in the macros.
Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely plan on having it change. So basically, my coach, Marcellus, and our plan is basically to spend this next period just running the same like fundamental block structure we've been running, but now I'll have more calories to kind of get me back to where I started. And then once the bulk begins from like my normal set point, we are going to put a much bigger emphasis on hypertrophy. And I think the main reason for that is, like with my bench press, for example, I've benched 5-6 days a week for the past decade. And in order to see the best benching that I could ever have, I only comp bench. Like anytime I've tried introducing certain accessories, variations, like I'll get better at those accessories or variations, but bench won't go anywhere. And because there's always a competition on the horizon, you have to ask yourself like, all right, well, what am I going to prioritize here? I can't really gain that much muscle being the same weight class. So just double down on your strength, see if you could squeeze out a little more on bench. And that's worked. But now that there's a long time until competition and truly like an anabolic environment of gaining potentially 20 pounds, I think it makes sense to really deviate from what's historically worked on the main lifts. Obviously keep elements of it in, but prioritize what I've essentially missed out on for the past, 10 years.
You just skipped over something that I think's super important. And that was because you have this new objective, right? And most people are going to just jump on that objective, right? But if I heard what you just said, right, you're in this transitional block to get back to the starting line to where you need to be to start implementing that new objective.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Right? To where, now think of how most powerlifters or strength athletes lay their shit out, right? They're going to have, their comp time or whatever it is, and then they're going to have time that's after whatever that is, and then they're just going to go into whatever that next peaking block is. They're not building up to where the starting line is.
Yep.
Right? They have the objective, they go after the objective. I get it.
Yep.
Right? But you have to have the objective and then have the frame.
Yeah, absolutely.
To actually do the objective. Right? You can't say you want to work as an engineer for some place but not know how to fucking engineer.
Yep.
But that's what everybody does, right? So when you find yourself in those positions that you need those transitional blocks, you need to lay those out.
Yep.
And nobody does that.
No, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So
and I've had a lot of lifters I've coached who have moved up weight classes in the past couple of years. And I think maybe where I've gone wrong in the past with people who have gone up is we're like, well, training's going great. It's going to go even better if we just keep doing what we're doing. And in those early periods, it's like we see a ton of progress because we've been gaining weight, and then it kind of stalls. And now you don't have, if we're going to use muscle, like we don't have the muscular base to then support this new level of strength to then elevate that ceiling. So with basically everyone I've had move up a weight class, I'm like, we're going to actually, obviously finish out whatever transitional period, like you mentioned, but let's see if we can make maybe not the absolute best progress in the world over the next 6 months, but still make progress, but build a ton more tissue. And then when we go back to what has worked, it's like, now you are just a bigger, more complete individual to handle that.
Yeah. And you should be healthier.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Because of that. Any topics you wanted to go over I didn't bring up?
No, I don't think so. This has been awesome. Yeah, this has been great. How
can people find you the best way?
There are a couple different ways. I'll do all my plugs now. So Instagram is hamstring poppy. YouTube is just my name, Sean Noriega. And then myself and a couple other coaches run a platform called PowerliftingNow, which is what we call the Powerlifters Library. And it's all long form educational content. It's a subscription-based service, so it's $15 a month. And we have, hundreds of 45-minute to hour-long videos for coaches, athletes, There's like 2,500 members. It's really cool and keeps us on our toes as coaches. You know, you don't get complacent in knowing what you know, because you have to keep learning to keep putting out content. So
any final thoughts?
Best podcast I've ever done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for coming
wonderful.
out.
No,
this has been great. We're done.